Hey, it's Paul Bannis with GreatDad.com, and here we are today with David Baillie, who's a friend of mine through our coaching experience together. And I'm excited to talk to you, Dave. As people who listen to this podcast know, we talk to a lot of dads about their about whole bunch of different topics, all the way from driving safety to drugs to education, all over the map. This is one of the first conversations I'm having with actually a fellow coach about how Dave got into coaching and the intersection between learning coaching skills and the transition of having a different relationship with your adult kids.
Exactly.
So let's just get right into it. You've like me, you've been coaching for just 2 or 3 years. Is that do I have that right?
Yeah, it depends on where you start the timeline, but I would say since the first official class, probably a couple of years. It was a little bit before COVID.
Right.
Thinking back at all my years as a supervisor and a leader, I was, starting to do coaching along the way, adopting some of those things.
Yeah,
and probably even as a dad too, although I didn't know what I would call it back then.
Yeah, I think some of us come to this because we were already doing some mentoring or consulting, didn't really know what coaching was specifically and how that difference was, but kind of came into it thinking maybe it was a little bit more like that than what it actually is. You and I are both coactive trained coaches, which is one of the major institutions on coaching. We've both done positive intelligence coaching, and actually we're working together on a certification program right now together. So that's how we know each other. So we have kids that are, I guess yours are a little bit older than mine, and I'm really interested in this topic we talked about is this intersection between coaching and this transition period, because I'm going through that a little bit too. Why don't we talk a little bit about whether that has been painful for you or not, the idea that they've gone from being kids to adults and that switch, and how you navigate that.
It's painful. That's interesting. So I think it was painful before I made the switch. I think it was the tenseness, the not feeling just not being myself around them, right? Because it's like, well, here's the dad hat, and now that's gone, right? And at a certain point, you transition, into an adult relationship with your kids. But when does that happen? There's not like okay, 21 or 24 or whatever the magic number is. But I remember my relationship with my mom shifting, and it occurred when she would come visit every Memorial Day weekend, and it was just her and I. We would spend a few days together, and there was a point when that started where I just started doing things with her. Well, let's just go to this museum. Let's go have tea.
Yeah.
Right. And so then it was like, wow, there's this new relationship awakening here. So I think when my kids got to that age, I was wondering, well, how do I help them make that happen? And I'm sure that the coaching training and the skills that I developed over the last couple of years really help me open to that, and help me open that dialogue with them.
Yeah, because I think it's confusing for them too. And I remember it was confusing for me too when I was a young adult, is like that the relationship switches where your parent has all the control, and then they start loosening the reins a little bit, but there still is that awkward moment where my 22-year-old daughter still says, Daddy, can I have a friend over this afternoon? Or, can I do this? And I'm like, you're 22 and you're back home from college or whatever. It almost feels awkward to, think that I still hold that kind of power. It's sweet of her to ask, and it's very respectful, but at the same time, I think both parties are kind of playing through the roles of how to handle it all.
Yeah. And what if you could have, here's a coactive idea. Oh my gosh. What if you could have a design alliance conversation?
Oh, wow.
Right. And say, okay, now how do we want to start designing our relationship as adults? How does that look differently?
I like that. That is it's a great concept. For those who don't know the coactive model, the idea of designing the alliance is usually a first meeting with the client where you explain the rule, kind of the rules of the road, and you agree together on how certain things about how you're going to coach and how the conversations are going to go, and agree from the start. But I think that goes for any human relationship. If you had the courage to say to your spouse or to a friend or whatever, how do you want this to go?
How do you want this to go?
Yeah.
Yeah. I work for the Navy, and the military members, change out quite a bit. And there is actually an almost natural opportunity to have that conversation and step up to that. As a new officer, maybe I'm a civilian, and say, okay, this is what's your new role? Here's my role. How do we want to work together?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes when you open that up, it's like, whoa, I've never had that kind of conversation before,
Yeah, it's frank and it's honest and it's open. And that's kind of the three things we want to touch on about this transition from parenting kids to adults. Not that it has to be this way, but it sometimes is a point where where dads start to like change the relationship. And what we kind of were talking about is this, I don't like a lot of the buzzwords in the coaching world, but the intentionality, which is a good word for summing up the idea that you're going into this change and you're being very intentional. You've decided you're going to take a certain way of relating to them in a different way, and you're doing it on purpose.
It's literally asking yourself, how do I want that trip to go?
Yep.
And I think I shared with you, I had a pivot experience during COVID. I had gone through divorce. It had put a lot of stress and tension on the relationship with both my kids. My daughter is 4 years older than my son. They're both young adults now. And through it was very difficult retaining touch. And so it was the first COVID year, and my son came up with the idea of doing a Father's Day or Father's Week backpacking trip, because we had always done that together as a family before I'd gone through the divorce. So this was literally like a reunion or a reforming of our family with just my two kids and myself in the wilderness for 6 days.
Wow. That's a lot of time.
And now that we're talking about it, now that I'm thinking about it, I think I did set an intention. It's like, how do I want to show up? How do
Yeah.
And
yeah, do you want to be the dad who plans it all and tells them where to go and don't forget your water and all that stuff? Or
no, and it was like, let's just make it a backpacking trip, and everyone, the best backpacking trips I've ever been on, usually with fellow buddies and stuff. Everyone takes care of their own pack, yet they all contribute to the group's success, and I think because we had that structure in the past, we were able to just fall into that natural groove and just be. We had this amazing opportunity to just be and to be with each other.
Mm-hmm. So that would be the first thing. We were talking a little bit earlier too about the fact that both of us kind of probably, kind of just bungled our way through the early part. I mean, I'm sure we're both very good dads, very present dads from what I can tell, but we didn't have any really rules of the road. Coaching kind of has provided some of those ways of being, quote unquote, intentional, which is important. We had talked also about the fact that part of this was part of the change in the transition was also opening up to them and being more, I don't know, honest, frank, fewer barriers of, dad versus kids.
Yeah, exactly. The opening up and without getting into too much storytelling here, in the middle of the trip, we planned it so that we would stay in the same camp area for a couple of days. And one of the things that we found joy in doing is going off trail and just exploring. I mean, we're up at 10, 12,000 feet in the high Sierras, right? And so you just look at a map and you're like, well, that valley over there looks interesting. Maybe we can make it to that lake, and you just go. And I remember getting to the top of the ridge, and my son was like, well, which way do you want to go? And I'm like, I don't know. I asked my daughter, which way do you want to go? You want to go left? You want to go right? It's like, okay, well, let's go right. And through the whole day, it was almost like creative play, and there was no dad was left behind. I mean, I left my dad hat way back and we just sort of scampered around. We played in snowbanks. And we just enjoyed each other's company. And so there was that letting go. For me, that was actually an experience of letting go of the authoritative dad.
Yeah, yeah. And part of that, I think, an add-on concept of that is being vulnerable. I know that's thrown around a lot too, but how does that play in, or what ways can you, without saying, telling your deepest, darkest secrets and getting into something that becomes kind of awkward because you're oversharing, but how do you be more vulnerable to your kids as an adult? That, like I say, that doesn't sound like you're just letting loose on them.
So the thing that just showed up for me, Paul, is when your kids are really young, one of the advice is, spend some floor time, spend as much floor time as you can. When they're 2 and 3, play airplane, play whatever you're playing. And so I would say
it's a very dad centric behavior is.
Yeah, it's a very dad centric behavior is to play and be silly and giggle. And that day, at some point, I don't know if you want to say devolved or evolved to that. And, my son was like, well, let's go slide on our butts down this snowbank. I mean, we don't have sleds, we don't have anything, and you really don't know how far down that's going to go or whatever. And I was like, I need to get in my child here. I need to just go with it.
Yeah.
And so that's a vulnerability right there, right? It's like, okay, I'm going to get down I'm going to get down on the floor with my kids, or, they're young adults, but, young adults are going to scamper around a lot more than, their 50-year-old dad is going to want to scamper around. Now, I didn't dive into the ice cold lake. I let my daughter do that. I mean, there's literally ice on the lake.
For you are that vulnerable.
I wasn't going to be quite that, no. But so that kind of set it up. But the real vulnerability point was the last night of the trip. And we were camping. And I just, even if you're hiking together, you also have a lot of alone time on the trail where you're just thinking and processing, and you almost lose language. It's beautiful when it happens. And so you're kind of really allowing your emotions to evoke. And I think I know the coaching training and practicing that, helped me get in touch with myself. And it was the last day we had set up camp, and I went to them, and they were making dinner at the fire or what have you. And I said, I want to give a toast, and I want to thank you for this trip, and how much it touches my heart, and how much I love you guys, and how much I've loved this experience. And that's about as far as I got, because I just started crying.
Yeah, I can believe it. Yeah.
And I don't think they had ever seen me open up like that.
Yeah, I think it's very moving in the telling, because I can imagine the emotions for both of you, especially if that hadn't been part of your,
No, it had been very, closed through the divorce and all this other kind of stuff that had going on. And so that was a moment of deep vulnerability, right? But I know that was a pivot point for us. And the last day when we finally got back to the car and we're sitting on the tailgate, getting our stuff packed in and everything, my son sat down next to me and he said, Dad, I'm really sorry that in college I didn't spend more time with you. I feel like I lost time.
Wow.
And I said, you know what? We're here together now, and it was great. So thank you.
Yeah. Well, vulnerability really opens up other people's vulnerability, and it's hard to overrate how important that is in human relationships. I mean, especially as men, but there are a lot of women who experience the same thing, is that they're told to be super people all the time, never show a weakness at all. Most of them at work, but then they forget that even when they're with their friends, that you don't have to keep up that pretext all the time. And people just love people more when they sense they're not, superhumans, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, not superhumans, not guarded, not
Right.
um
Yeah, as insecure as we all are, we'd like to know that other people are fighting their own demons as well. I think makes us feel
yeah, when you're feeling you're a red hot mess, you like to know someone else out there is a red hot mess today too, right?
that's one trick, even in positive intelligence, in coaching, anything where you're dealing with judges and saboteurs, is realizing that the guy who cut you off in traffic or whatever is likely dealing with his own crap, and trying to get through the day.
Yeah.
Most people
Yeah.
are doing that in their silent way. So the third thing that's a coaching principle, and I've never really talked about this with another coach or anybody else on the podcast, but it's such an important lesson. It's something we learn early on, at least in CTI training, is this idea of level 1, 2, and 3 listening.
Yeah.
And it's such an important concept in communication. And I don't do it all the time. It's hard to get into to be aware of it all the time. But the idea that level 1 is just data, and level 2 is a little bit higher than that. And level 3 is actually not only active listening, but listening to the entire environment, everything that's happening around you. Not if you're listening to us, not only hearing the concepts or the discussion, the back and forth, and that's really important too, but also what's the vibe? Am I feeling comfortable right now? Am I feeling warm? Does this feel like a positive, energy thing? It's a little bit hard to define, but that's the kind of thing that you were talking to me about being an important thing about your relationship with your kids, is getting to that.
Yeah, getting to that and popping out of that. It's so, when you're a parent and maybe from a dad perspective too, I don't know, it's like the discipline, right? The discipline isn't about meting out consequences. Discipline has more to do with am I disciplined and consistent with my behavior,
That too.
But you can very easily get into, or stay in a level 1, with your kid, don't do that, or don't do this, or what have you, or I can remember a playground incident when my kids were very young and I was still learning to be a dad, obviously, of course. And I don't know what admonishment I had given to my son or what have you, but it was clear to this observer that I was pretty tense about it. And they just said a comment like, isn't this time wonderful to have them at that age? And it kind of snapped me. I mean, I felt probably embarrassed at the time, but it snapped me out into, you know what? My son is at an age, such a young age, 2 or 3 years old. They don't have a clear concept of ownership. He's taking someone else's toy or what have you, And so just to be loving with loving kindness, you can show up with loving kindness if you're aware of the broader context, I don't know if that makes sense. I mean, for me in that backpacking trip, it was just liberating myself to just, when you're in the wild, you're just there. You're not worried about anything else. And so you can pick that vibe up more, okay, this is the day for play. We're just going to go run around and scamper around here and see what shows up, and allow that to happen.
No, I think that does explain it. It's probably a harder concept than you and I can probably communicate in a short amount of time, but it is at the center of this whole idea of kind of living in the present, which again is kind of a buzzword, but it does sum up this kind of feeling where not only are you having the experience, you're having the experience, but you're feeling a larger thing around the experience that makes it even deeper. And we have these, but we're not really aware of them. But the perfect moments when you're just new in love and you're watching a sunset, maybe that's a good example of when you would feel like this level 3 thing, that it kind of transcends just the sunset or just the person, but it's it's the environment.
I think that's a good example, and what I like about that, and what comes to mind is we all have experiences like that. We all in our human experience, we have experienced at level 3. We might not have had the language to name it, But now that we're talking about it, and to the listeners that are listening to this, I can imagine that people are transported back to, oh, that was the experience. Oh, for me, it's that backpacking, experience with my kids, that we were just at this level 3 and just being and seeing what was needed in the moment. And it really can serve you well as a parent and in anything, and that's what we practice as coaches, right? That's the you have to practice it. You can't be trained in this. You have to just go out there and make the connection, and then say, you know what? Let's pause for a minute. Let's just sit with the silence and see what's showing up, and trust that that the emotional vibe is going to be there, and just have faith with that. And the best way to explain it is to ask people to think about a time when they were in that space.
Yeah, what the CTI thing is, what is the I'm blanking out the something experience, the peak experience exercise, where you ask somebody to
remember, oh yeah, peak experience,
fully alive, and then what was that about? Trying to imagine not only what it was, but what were the colors, what were the smells, what were the sounds, and the entire thing.
I think the trick is, how do you trigger something in yourself so that you can bring in that perspective. Mm-hmm. That's a lot of what PQ has to offer, right? It's hey, I'm focused on whatever, I'm having negative emotions, or I'm focused on some kind of conflict at the time, but what do I need to do to kind of snap myself, pause? For me, it's the breathing. And that then reawakens your senses, and you can become more aware of what's really going on here, right? And so I think the times when I was my best dad, my best version of dad, were the times when I was able to just rest with that for a moment and say, okay, wait a second, let's just.
So how concretely, if we were suggesting this as an exercise, to like sit down with your almost adult child, or your adult child, where you want to go deeper, how would you go about like having a conversation where you reach that level 3, or you try to get to that level 3? Is there anything that you'd suggest?
Oh, wow. There's the $1 million question there. It's, for me, and for me, it helps to have a shared activity. Yep. And it helps to allow yourself, both people, to be lost in that shared activity. So it's a shared activity that your adult child is interested in and loves, right? And maybe plan that out and say, hey, I'd love to do something with you, but I'd like it to be, your kind of, get their idea and input on that, and then get lost in that day or that event or whatever it is that you're sharing. And I just trust that it will open up. There'll be an opportunity to put a little bit of that conversation out there. I don't think it's realistic to think you're going to sit down and say, well, now, son, you're 21 and we're going to talk about our relationship is different. I think you have to sprinkle it in there over a series of interactions, right? Because you're really changing something. And just like with the coaching process, the growth occurs in between the conversations. So that would be my sage advice to that. And thinking back to my own experiences, you're not going to get it all done even in 1 year. It's a transition, and you need time too as a parent. You're kind of learning a different dance here, and your child's an individual, and just trust the process. I think trust the process, and make little deposits into that level 3 space. And my way of doing it would be through some kind of shared activity, because then you're out of whatever the normal structure of life is.
Well, yeah, I like that. Shared activity is really a great thing along the way. I always say that when they're little, they're portable, and you just take them wherever you possibly can and share everything every moment. And there comes a day where they start to choose, They pick and choose
Yes.
where they want to do it. And then later on, hopefully when you're adults, you kind of negotiate that together. But I would challenge people, like if they do that type of thing, like whatever it is, play golf or whatever it is that there's a shared activity, is that you take a moment and try to reach that level of that level of three experience. I remember when I got married, which is 20, almost 25 years ago, I guess. I should know that. I didn't know that number.
You're not listening to this, right?
But my wife, when we were in the middle of the reception, and it was an outdoor wedding. She pulled me out into a field, and she just said, "Let's just take a second away from people and just take a mental snapshot of how this all feels at the moment." And it brings tears to my eyes almost just thinking about it now, because that's a memory from that wedding that I'll never forget, because it pulled us closer, and we were at that level 3. We could hear the people in the background, we could hear we had just experienced the wedding, all the people around us, and it was a full level 3 experience. But if you could do that with your child, you'll realize that you're at a different
you can, you can. And it's like, oh my gosh, I think I'm feeling like we just kind of hit gold here or something, because what your wife did and what you experienced together was you built space into that moment, right? And I shared with you, both my kids are musicians, and the saying is that it's the space between the notes that make the music, right? It's how it gets played, right? And it's so easy to build in that. I mean, even I remember when the kids were really young, and as you say, you kind of decide or you suggest, and they were I called them daddy days, and we would go, and sometimes it wouldn't really be much of anything. We'd go and watch airplanes land at the airport and have an ice cream cone or something, But if you're at the zoo, maybe you buy that ice cream cone and you sit down on that bench and you just sit there and enjoy that.
Yeah.
And that's a way to build a habit that then when you get into the more awkward years, or you get into those periods where there's a little bit more of a transition in the relationship, you already kind of have this habit of quiet moments,
Yeah. Well, this has just been a really interesting conversation, because you and I are at similar stages with our adult children and navigating it, and it's endlessly interesting to me also as coaches how we explain a lot of these things. For people who are interested in your coaching services, what do you have a website that they can go to?
I don't have a website, but I am up on LinkedIn, so they can look up David Baillie on LinkedIn.
Okay.
Right now, I'm focusing on people that are facing a transition or contemplating one. That could be a career change or promotion, or it could be something as we were talking about here today, Paul. It's like, hey, how do I transition my relationship with my children from one phase to the next phase? So I've been through some good transitions over the last few years, and so I think I've got some trail time in that area, and can hopefully share some sage wisdom with my clients in that. So thank you for that.
Okay, very good. Liz, Paul Baillie with GreatDad.com. You can find more about my coaching services, specifically the workshop with positive intelligence, at GreatDad.com/PQ, whereas there's a description of that program. But I also do one-on-one coaching, mostly with dads who are going through all these transitions, from both newly pregnant and new kids, but all the way through empty nesters, which is near and dear to my heart suddenly, since I'm about to hit that big life milestone myself.
Well, Paul, I just want to say, I wish that I knew you as my younger self, because I can see, and I know that I would benefit, my relationship with my kids would benefit from investing in that.
Yeah, well, mine would have too. I mean, if I bungled along, and I did the best I could, and learned a lot of tips and tricks along the way, and it's all good.
Thanks a lot,
Dave, for spending time with me, and we'll see you next time.
Okay, namaste.